Okay, so if we were to go from the whole development of the various different parts and pieces of that egg to the ovarian cycle, okay, this is what we're going to be talking about here. It's all dependent upon hormones, guys. I mentioned the hormones earlier. When I talk about this in the recordings, there are 3 major hormones that are involved here. We'll be talking about these. There's a couple of other ones as well, but FSH and LH are the 2 major ones. Follicle stimulating hormone is going to cause the development of the follicle, primary follicle, secondary follicle, antral follicle, all that nonsense. And luteinizing hormone will be involved with the ovulation process. There are 3 different phases of the ovarian cycle, and I always find it fascinating and interesting. You guys, when I mean you guys, you girls, you women, you guys have the hardest time when it comes to the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle. It is something that you guys deal with all the time, probably. But for whatever reason, now there's always a higher percentage of women in 109 than men. So that may be why. Okay, I get it. But it's the specifics when it comes to these things. I get it. You guys know firsthand what happens. You are your expert. You are an expert of your body. I get it. Okay. But don't forget all the particulars when it comes to these things. We have the ovarian cycle, has 3 parts to it: the follicular phase, a phase of ovulation, and the luteal phase. A lot of people get the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle backwards. Do not ask me how. I do not know why. Okay. But I will ask in the past, I've asked an explanation of one of these cycles, and it really hurts my soul. It honestly does, to give 0 points when there is so much verbiage there and all of it's right, but it didn't answer the question. And it's so crushing. You had everything there for the ovarian cycle, and I asked the menstrual cycle. Or I asked for the ovarian cycle, and you have everything there for the menstrual cycle. Okay. Don't get these flip-flopped and messed up. Okay. Don't do that. I don't want to have to do that to you because it crushes me. It crushes my tiny little soul. All right. So let's look at the follicular phase. A lot of stuff happens during this follicular phase. During the luteal or during the ovulation phase, it's pretty simple. It's ovulation, and it's due to one thing. So not much is going to really be going on there. All right. But there are some things. Okay. A typical cycle for a woman is 28 days. And I fully understand, guys, it's never 28 days, right? For some women, it is. For some, it's 21 days. For some, it's 36 days. For some, you never know when the hell it's going to show up. All right. So I get it. Okay. I totally get it. Totally get it. So this is the first 13 days of a 28-day cycle. We have the first 13 days and the last 13 days, and then a day in between the first 13 and the last 13. Okay. It's not part of the process that I really expect you to know, but I'm just putting this part in here just to tell you guys that we don't know. There are around 20 of these primordial follicles that are stimulated to mature. Okay, these are sitting there waiting. You produced them all. 400,000 are sitting there waiting. And about 20 of them actually are stimulated to mature. ultimately one wins out. They don't know, it's unclear as to why some of the primordial cells all of a sudden kickstart and some of them don't. Why one ultimately makes it and why the others don't. They try to figure out why. They don't understand 100% as to why. So that's why I put that in there, because even though we know a whole heck of a lot of stuff, there's still a whole heck of a lot of stuff we don't know. Like the development of a polar body. What's it really for? There are a number of potential reasons as to having it. It provides something. It provides sustenance to the actual egg that does fully develop. But the exact reason as to its being is may not fully understood yet. So there's a lot of kind of stuff here that we don't fully understand. And I find that fascinating, okay? Because there's actually a lot of stuff in this later section of the book that we know, but we don't know exactly why some of the things occur and happen. So it's pretty interesting. And that's what really is kind of going on in here. All right. All right. So, all right. So, what is occurring in the follicular phase? Well, the follicle is developing. Okay. Follicle is developing. Okay. What does that mean? Well, we have granulosa cells, right? Granulosa cells secrete estrogen. As estrogens, I'm going to put estro, increase, that follicle is going to develop. Granulosa cells not only secrete estrogens, but they secrete this stuff called inhibin. And guys have something similar that goes on inside their testes that does the same thing. Inhibin helps to slow down. So this really helps to regulate the amount of estrogens that get produced. What causes estrogen production? Well, granulosa cells are stimulated to start proliferating by presence of follicle-stimulating hormone. As follicle-stimulating hormone levels rise, granulosa cells increase in numbers. As granulosa cells increase in numbers, estrogen levels rise. Inhibin is secreted by these granulosa cells as they develop to make sure that the rate of development is proper. You don't want it too fast. And that's what would happen if these granulosa cells just produced copious and copious and copious amounts of estrogen. So as these follicles are developing, granulosa cells are proliferating in number due to FSH. And granulosa cells secrete estrogen. And estrogen is what causes the maturation, the development of that follicle. And it goes through primary, secondary, all that we talked about just a second ago. As we get to the vesicular follicle, as we get closer to that mature follicle, only one of those 20 that started have made it to this quote unquote finish line. Only one is developing a huge antrum filled with fluid that's bathing this developing follicle with estrogens. All of the other primordial follicles that developed Well, they atrophy and go away. There's a couple of them that get into that primary phase, that primary follicle, and then start to diminish in size and regress. And they are called polar bodies. You can have one, you can have two. Again, this is a non-functional cell. They believe that it provides sustenance for the developing egg, for the one that does develop. They believe it helps with the fertilization process of the egg. They believe it can, basically supply sustenance for that developing zygote. But other than that, it's just a working kind of theory. Because different animals have the same kind of polar body express. And we know potentially what it does when it's not there, but we don't know what exactly it does when it's there. So it's, for me, it's a fascinating thing to read about as we try to really, truly understand the presence of why that polar body is necessary. All right. But during this follicular phase, even though we kickstart 20 of these bad boys into development, only one makes it to the Graphinian follicle, to that mature follicle. Only one. Everybody else regressed. And a couple of them make it to this regression form of being a polar body and helping with the developmental process. So the follicular phase, phases days 1 through 13 of the 28-day cycle. Granulosa cells are increasing in numbers due to follicle stimulating hormone. As the granulosa cells increase in numbers, they increase in the production of estrogens. They also secrete inhibin. Inhibin helps to regulate the speed at which the follicle develops. By day 14, we have the mature follicle ready. Only one of those 20 have made it to this spot. On day 14, FSH starts to diminish. And we start to get a rise in luteinizing hormone. That's LH. Luteinizing hormone is what causes the ovary to get a little bit bigger in size. As it increases in size, that really causes the surface to thin out immensely. All that pressure from that fluid-filled antrum causes that egg to get squished against that very thin wall of the ovary now. And when you look at it on an imaging study, you see this big sunbursting effect behind the egg as it's being squished out of the ovary. And that's the corona radiata that you see. That's where it got its name from. It looks like a sunburst. As that antrum pushes that ovary against the wall, and as that wall is thinned out, it causes that ovary to be ejected or rupture. Okay. And now that mature egg, that mature follicle is now sitting in Mrs. Fallopian tube. Okay, at least hopefully. Guess it doesn't have to. So we have the first 13 days. follicle development, the follicular phase. FSH rises, causes granulosa cells to develop, increase in estrogens, which increases the development of the follicle inside. Inhibin helps to slow it down, just make sure it's regulated. Day 14, you get a rise in luteinizing hormone, thins out the wall of the ovary, and spits out the ovary. Spits out the mature follicle. What remains, remember, is that corpus luteum. This is the luteal phase. Day 15 through 28. The last 13 days. The corpus luteum, as you can see from the slide there, is producing a copious amount of progesterone. It also does a little bit of estrogen, but this is its claim to fame. It is a temporary endocrine gland for all intents and purposes. FSH levels have plummeted. LH levels have plummeted. And what rises now within a female body is a huge increase in progesterone levels. Progesterone is steroids for the uterus. Progesterone is what is going to cause the uterine lining to really thicken up and develop. More blood, more glands, more glandular activity, all sorts of fun stuff that we'll talk about when we look at the uterus. But the uterine lining is what's going to sustain the fertilized egg. Until we can get that placenta developed. And if fertilization does occur, we maintain this structure, this luteum structure, this corpus luteal structure, and we get a copious amount of progesterone levels that are produced for the female. No fertilization? No problem. For about 10 days, 13 days, this corpus luteum structure survives. And if there's been no fertilization occurs, it degenerates into that corpus albicans. As the corpus albicans take shape, which is corpus luteum regression, progesterone levels plummet. As progesterone levels plummet, that uterine lining can't be maintained. And that leads us into, or leads you into, menstruation. And as soon as menstruation begins, ladies and gentlemen, the luteal phase is over. You undergo the menstrual phase at that point. And while that is being shed, you are starting it all over again. FSH starts to rise. This causes the follicle to start developing. Granulosa cells increase in numbers, and yada, yada, yada. We do it all over again, or you do it all over again. Follicular phase, phase of ovulation, and the luteal phase. That is the ovarian cycle. That is the ovarian cycle. As soon as we start talking about, or after we talk about the uterus, because here's the uterus down in here. Okay. You can see FSH high as the follicle is developing. About day 14, it starts to drop a little bit, but who do we rise up? Luteinizing hormone rises, and you ovulate, and then it drops back down. And then it starts to rise again after you menstruate. This is a wonderful little picture here. whoops, sorry. This right here is gonadotrophin releasing hormone. GN is gonadotrophin. Gonadotrophin. And then RH is releasing hormone. RE releasing hormone. I can't spell today. Gonadotrophin releasing hormone is stimulated from the, or is secreted by the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus acts on the anterior pituitary to secrete follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone stimulates follicular development. As the granulosa cells develop, secretes estrogen. Estrogen is what helps to cause further development of that follicle and is a positive feedback mechanism. As we get closer to day 14, you get that rise in luteinizing hormone. No release of luteinizing hormone, ladies, no ovulation. If not fertilized, progesterone levels plummet, and the cycle repeats. After about 3 months, just for grins and giggles, guys, after about 3 months, that placenta takes over for the ovary, for the corpus luteum. And then it will regress and the placenta takes over.